Hello, welcome to my first video. Obviously, still working on that intro. Don't know how to say hi to myself in my basement recording this. This is my first YouTube video, can you tell? It's a time-lapse of some Conjuring fan art, and I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on the movies. I'm a huge horror fan, huge fan of the 70s, 60s, all that retro stuff, and definitely when it has to do with horror. That's my favorite thing ever. My name is Samantha, and I am a watercolor artist, illustrator, comic maker in the future, and sometimes I animate, and I do artist alleys and all sorts of stuff. So if you're interested just off the bat of my work, it's linked below, so you can check that out if you feel like it. I figure I'll waste no time and just jump right into what we're doing here. I am drawing fan art of the fictional version of Arne Johnson. And can I say off the bat, are we all in agreement that he killed someone? Like, for real, like he killed someone and he kind of got away with it? Are we all in agreement on that? Are we all in agreement about the Warrens? I'm not even gonna go there. But, you know, I appreciate some good fictional movies, okay? That's all I'm gonna say regarding that. But I'm always down to appreciate a good hottie covered in blood, okay? I don't care how it's, like, presented. Just give it to me. And, if you do, I'm probably gonna draw fan art of it, which is what's happening today. Arne Johnson, you stole my heart a little bit, but you did not steal it more than Patrick Wilson, who was gonna be, the subject of my next video, but I'm gonna try to rein it in so I can talk about all the movies and all what, you know, what every actor in the movies has to offer, and not just Patrick. That being said, all my supplies are listed below. I was gonna go over all of them before as an intro since this is my first video, but I figure, like, that just spends, like, so much time talking about supplies when you might just be here for, like, the horror part of it, and, so all the supplies are linked below that I'm using. They are all, in my opinion, equally life-changing, if that matters to you, especially if you use watercolor. I'm using liquid watercolor. It's like, I'm just gonna say it's life-changing, and I tried to find the cheapest options for you, and I linked those, so you can check that out if that's something you're interested in. But we're just gonna go ahead and start talking about the Conjuring trilogy, and I put that in kind of like quotes, because obviously there's a lot of movies in this franchise, but I'm just gonna talk about the Conjuring, like the actual, you know, in the name, Conjuring movies, while I paint this fan art. So let's talk with about the Conjuring first. This came out in 2013. You know, I was 19 when this came out, and I have to say, up until that point, I hadn't seen a horror movie quite like this before. I really feel like even now, The Conjuring was a big game changer for horror. You know, I'm not going to say all horror, you know, there's so many subgenres and stuff, and indie movies that are obviously killing it. But in terms of mainstream horror, The Conjuring really, I feel like The Conjuring just switched the track from what we were seeing before in the early 2000s. You know, you had Insidious come out in 2011. I feel like that was almost like the baby example of what kind of horror we were gonna start coming to expect in the next years. And I was kind of disappointed rewatching Insidious recently. It didn't hit like the first time it did when we saw it back in the day. And I feel like that's because you started having movies like The Conjuring that just started hitting it out of the freaking park. I feel like The Conjuring was a big game-changing movie. And, you know, whether the franchise that came after it, you know, lives up to the same standard that the first one set, you know, I don't know. I can't answer that. But for the first one, like, so, you know, this movie, of course, stars Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. They're playing Ed and Lorraine Warren, real-life demonologists, paranormal investigators. And something that's unique about all these movies is that this is kind of like, is this the first franchise that has two characters that you know aren't gonna die in them? So then, you know, they kind of allow the movie to have these quiet, even really romantic scenes. In a horror movie, like, randomly, there'll be really sincere scenes. You know, in the first one, you know, they have the scenes where they're at their house and they're just talking to each other, and there's some light humor and, you know, relationship humor that just, you know, adds to the characters. I feel like there's not many, if any, horror movies that do that, because, you know, of course, a lot of horror movies, they get you on the premise that, like, you don't know who's gonna die, so you're always in suspense, like, you don't know what's gonna happen. But since the Conjuring movies are based on real people's cases, you know, they already know you're not gonna think they're gonna die, so they instead take those moments to have, you know, these cute scenes that I just feel like aren't in a lot of movies. And also, I thought The Conjuring was really solidly scary, especially when I was younger, of course. So much good use of the setting and different techniques. What I will say, of course, to me, the weakest parts of all of these movies is when they've got somebody in makeup and contacts. I'm not into, like, that more campy stuff, and I feel like that's where they start to teeter into that. But then it's like they'll equally have, like, really cool scenes that are pretty scary. I love suspense. I love when something's hiding in the dark and you can't freaking see it. And I also love just really good visuals too. I find one of the highlights of The Conjuring to be the end exorcism scene when the mom, you know, under the sheet, she vomits blood and then everything stops and she just levitates in the chair. I love how that was filmed. I just feel like that was such a solid movie, and I loved all the characters and just the way they did certain scares, the way they used music. You know, Time of the Season played at one point, and so did In the Room Where You Sleep, which is by Ryan Gosling's band, Dead Man's Bones, which you need to check out if you like, you know, haunting, spooky music. I just think The Conjuring is such a good movie to I'm almost excited that this is a movie that teens or even kids, I guess, are gonna grow up to watch and be introduced to. I feel like it's gonna be such an effective movie for a young person to see. Like, I was already 19 when I saw it, so I was a little bit older. You know, I'd already seen a lot of different horror movies. Not as many as now. I've definitely become more of a horror film buff in the last, like, maybe 5 years in terms of it being, like, a real part of my identity. But I've always, you know, been attracted to the spooky, scary stuff. But this is such a good movie to see for the first time ever. And I feel like it was a game-changing movie, honestly. And it has an 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I don't care about Rotten Tomatoes. One of my favorite movies is a movie called Leap Year from 2010. Just look it up. You'll see. You'll see. So I don't care what Rotten Tomatoes says, but it does have an 86%, which I do think is really deserved. And so I've been trying to record this audio a few times, and the first time I recorded it, I hadn't yet rewatched the second one, so it had been a while. And when I looked up, you know, the reviews for The Conjuring 2, which came out in 2016, follows another case of the Warrens, this time in England, I saw it had an 80%, and I was pretty surprised because I felt like I remember not caring for it that much, but then I decided to rewatch both the first and second in between, you know, re-recording. And that's a solid one too. I was kind of in shock. I guess, I don't know, I feel like sometimes my sensibilities change in terms of how generous, I guess, I'm feeling towards a movie. But that was a really solid addition, I felt like. Of course, they had, personally, I find, The Nun to be kind of campy. There's some moments where, it was effectively scary, but a lot of the times, like I said before, makeup and the context, I don't know. I prefer more of the subtler scares, rather than the things that are, like, in your face. I think one of the most effective scenes in The Conjuring 2 is when, Patrick Wilson as Ed is interviewing the spirit that's in Janet when she's in the armchair, and the focus is on Patrick Wilson, so she's in the back all blurry, and of course she starts like distorting. I think that kind of stuff really it inspires me and makes me do that kind of like ooh thing, like when you watch a horror movie and you see something kind of really effective and cool, and even, like, a little scary. And again, they have some really sincere scenes in the second one that you almost are kind of watching, like, wait, what's happening right now? Because it's so unexpected for a horror movie to be like, no, right now we're gonna sit and be quiet and have a nice moment. That's not something you really get to have a lot of in horror, so I do appreciate The Conjuring for that. And that one's really good. That's on Netflix as well as the first one, at least in the US. So if you've never seen them, and you happen to be watching this, go watch them. They're right there, waiting for you, and they're really good. So I definitely recommend those first two. Pleasantly surprised rewatching the second one. And I saw that in theaters too, and that was really effective in the theater. I had a really good time, I remember seeing that one. Which brings us to the third Conjuring, which was supposed to come out, I believe, in September 2020. But, of course, with everything that happened, it got pushed to June. So I got to see this back as my first movie back to the movie theater in 16 months, which I used to go all the time. Lots of points racked up at Regal. And so this is my first movie back. They totally renovated my movie theater. It looks like a space station now. And I was really excited to get to see a horror movie as my first one back. Especially, I love Patrick Wilson, as I've said, and I like the Conjuring movies, so I'll keep going to see them, as long as, I get to see, Patrick. So I was really excited to go see this as my first movie back. This one has a 56% on Rotten Tomatoes, which kind of shocks me, kind of doesn't, only because of how I feel about this movie. I loved the first half a lot. I felt like, man, they came out with the scares like immediately, and they were so good. I just love a good visual, especially if it involves blood. I'm kind of a blood freak. Again, if you go on my social media, you'll see that I'm obsessed with the 70s, and blood makes an appearance quite frequently. And so when they did that blood shower in the beginning, I loved that. And I think my favorite scene in that whole movie is when Arne is losing it to Call Me by Blondie. I love when movies and TV shows incorporate music in a way that is almost like choreographical. I feel like we're entering like an age where so much media is doing that now. A really good example is like any episode of The Umbrella Academy, they're gonna have a song that's almost choreographed to the scene, and it is so just like awesome. And so I loved that scene, and I always love in a horror movie when they pick a song that is kind of unexpected, and so I loved that scene, and I love, of course, what I'm painting of right now, when Arnie's walking down the street and he turns around and it's revealed he's covered in blood. I love that. Me and my twin, we love stuff like this. So especially if it's, like I said in the very beginning of this video, if you give me a hottie covered in blood, we just we both at the same time, because we're like the same person, just leaned in and we were like slurp. Like, we just love stuff like that. So that was definitely my favorite scene out of the whole movie, just because of my own personal tastes. And within that scene, there's a moment where Arnie's in the kennel, and the landlord's coming at him in the dark, and all you see is white lights in place of his eyes. I just think that was such a little effective thing. I love tiny, subtle, scary things. That's usually my favorite moments in horror movies, is when something is subtle and when you could almost miss it. The Ritual has some really, really good scenes like that. And that's on Netflix too. But what I will say about The Conjuring 3 is, this one, of course it doesn't take place in a haunted house. So I'm gonna be a little spoilery here. It's revealed that the bad guy is an actual living person. And I felt like the latter half of the movie kind of waned for me. I still really liked the whole thing as a whole. Because of that, I love the trilogy. I think it's a solid trilogy. But the latter half, just in terms of the storyline, personally for me, it kind of dragged on a bit. You got less of like the scary things and it got a little more actiony, which is, I'm sure a movie some people liked, but for me, I felt like the strongest scenes were in almost like the very beginning. And I love a good possession. I love a good possession where the person is, just struggling with the fact that, that there's either a curse on them or, that they're being possessed. That's something that I really like watching in horror. Especially if the person is cute. I'm just saying, okay? So I loved the scenes with Arnie, like all of them. But the one thing I will say about all the movies, just because of the kind of horror I do like, is I'm never usually a big fan of the big blowout scenes at the end when all the stuff's flying everywhere, and people are floating, except like I said in the beginning with The Conjuring, there's that scene where, the mom's levitating that I mentioned that I think is really effective. But, at the end of The Conjuring 3, when Arnie's, like, floating and the girlfriend's holding him and there's that priest and, like, the windows are all breaking, those are always, like, my least favorite scenes just because they're not scary. But obviously I understand, these movies need big climaxes like that. And I feel like they fit for this franchise. I have seen, I think, Annabelle. I don't think I saw the whole thing, or I did and I really checked out because I thought it was trash. So then I never watched the other ones in the franchise, but I see a lot of people saying that they like those movies, and I'm curious if those are good, because I always kind of thought that they looked like garbage. I'm sorry. I'm an open-minded horror fan. Like I said, must a horror movie be good? Is it not enough to just be hot and covered in blood? That's kind of my philosophy with some horror, but some horror is just either so mainstream it's bad or so indie it's bad, like I'm kind of a middle ground person, so seeing movies like spin-offs, like the Annabelle ones and The Nun, I never was interested in them, because I just kind of looked at the trailers and been like, this movie is going to be so bad. But then I see people say they like them, so I'm curious if I should give them a chance. And if I was just being, like, a jerk about those movies. So I'm curious if you've seen them. Do you like them? Like, are they even comparable to the 3 Conjuring movies? I'm really curious about that, honestly. Okay, I did just look on Rotten Tomatoes. The Annabelle has a 26%, so I feel like I said, one of my favorite movies, I'm pretty sure has a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I know that doesn't mean anything, but that kind of lines up with what I had thought when I saw, some of that movie. And then Annabelle Comes Home has a 65, which is kind of high for I find that to be high for a horror movie. If a horror movie has like a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, there's a high chance I'm gonna really like it. So I'm wondering if I need to see that one. And then The Nun has a 24%. So that might be self-explanatory. But I'm curious always, what other people think. If it's worth checking out, I would be down. I think the only negative thing I'll say about the trilogy, besides, that these are real people being used for fiction and, that's a little controversial is that I feel like once a movie's good, that's it. It's becoming a franchise. But at the same time, you know, they knocked it out of the park with The Conjuring 2, and I felt like The Conjuring 3 was really strong, and I'm just gonna say it. I will take a Conjuring 4 because I just adore Patrick Wilson with my whole heart. He's gonna be the subject of my next video. I'm gonna paint an illustration of him in my dream horror role for him, and talk about kind of his career in that genre. And I'm just that person, like, John Wick 4 is coming out. I'm so excited. I love those movies too. Like, once I start to like a movie, I'm down for the sequel. But in terms of the spin-offs, I don't know. And I feel like, but hasn't that always been the case? You know, look how many Saws there are. And, you know, every other horror franchise you can think of. Like, I think that's just kind of might be par for the course. But I think the Conjuring movies are solid. I like them a lot. And I have some, like, really good memories, you know, with, seeing the first one especially, that I'll always hold on to. So that might make me a little biased. But those are my thoughts on all 3 Conjuring movies in, what I consider to be the trilogy of them, you know, not including the others. And I'm curious, how you feel about them. We're wrapping up Arne here. He's almost fully painted and lined. Oh, I didn't put microns in the description, so I'll have to put... I just use micron pens. You know, you can find them anywhere. Right now in this video, I think I'm using, you know, anywhere from 0.3, 0.5, 0.8 to 1 in terms of the micron sizes. And yeah, this is my finished process. If you want to hear about how I paint, I can explain that in another video. I just felt like it might, you know, bog down this one. But thank you for watching if you did. Again, like, leave me your thoughts about the movies below. Check out my links in my description to my social medias. I also have an Etsy store with some products that you might want to check out. And I will be seeing you, but not really, in the next video. So thank you so much for watching. Bye!